when someone begins to wake up, when someone starts to see through the game that everyone else is playing. And that is, they become frightening to other people. Now, why should this be? Why should clarity be threatening? Why should someone who sees deeply into the nature of things make others uncomfortable? Well, let me tell you, it's one of the most interesting aspects of human psychology, and it reveals something very profound about the way we organize our collective lives, our societies, our very sense of who we are. You see, most people are living in what I call a mutual conspiracy. We've all agreed, tacitly, unconsciously, to believe certain things about reality. We've agreed that the emperor is wearing clothes, even though he's quite naked. We've agreed that this piece of paper called money has value. We've agreed that these arbitrary lines on a map called borders are real and important. We've agreed that you are you and I am I, and we're separate, isolated individuals competing for scarce resources in a hostile universe. Now, none of these things are fundamentally true. They're conventions, agreements, useful fictions that allow us to organize society and get along with each other. But we've forgotten that they're fictions. We've mistaken the map for the territory, the menu for the meal. And we live our entire lives inside this agreed-upon hallucination, never questioning it, never looking behind the curtain. Then along comes someone who has seen through it, someone who has realized that the emperor has no clothes, someone who has awakened from the collective dream. And what does this person do? Well, if they're wise, they might say nothing at all. They might simply smile and go about their business. But even their silence, even their smile, can be deeply unsettling to others. Because you see, when you encounter someone who has seen through the game, something inside you recognizes it. Some part of you knows that they know something you've been trying very hard not to know. They represent a threat to your entire framework of reality, your entire sense of security and identity. Let me give you an example. Imagine you're in a theater, watching a film, completely absorbed in the story. You're identifying with the hero, you're afraid of the villain, you're emotionally invested in the outcome. Then someone leans over and whispers, "You know, it's just actors on a screen. None of this is real." How do you feel? Annoyed, probably. You don't want to be reminded that it's just a film. You want to stay in the illusion because the illusion is entertaining, it's engaging, it gives you something to feel strongly about. Now, multiply that by 1,000, and you begin to understand why people fear those who see too much. Because what these awakened individuals see is that everything, not just the film in the theater, but your job, your relationships, your ambitions, your fears, your entire life story is in a certain sense not as real as you think it is. It's a role you're playing, a character you're performing, a dream you're dreaming. And nobody wants to hear that. Nobody wants to be told that what they're taking so seriously is fundamentally a game, a play, a cosmic joke. Because if it's just a game, then what have they been doing all these years? All that striving, all that suffering, all those achievements and failures, were they for nothing? The awakened person seems to threaten the very meaning of your existence. But there's something even deeper going on. You see, our entire social structure is built on people taking the game seriously. Civilization requires that people show up to their jobs, pay their taxes, follow the rules, pursue success, fear failure, and generally behave as if all of this matters in some ultimate, absolute sense. The system needs you to be asleep, to be hypnotized, to be convinced that the symbols and abstractions we've created are real and important. Someone who has awakened from this trance is dangerous to the system, not because they're going to rebel or cause trouble, necessarily quite the opposite. They might be perfectly content and peaceful, but their very existence, their very presence, reminds others that there's a way out of the trap. They're like someone who has escaped from prison and come back to visit. The prisoners don't want to see them because it reminds them that the prison bars are, in a sense, optional. Throughout history, we see this pattern repeating. The awakened ones, the seers, the prophets, the mystics, they are consistently marginalized, ridiculed, persecuted, or killed. Not always, of course. Sometimes they're tolerated, sometimes they're even venerated, but usually only after they're safely dead and their teachings have been domesticated and made harmless. But while they're alive, while they're actually demonstrating that another way of being is possible, they make people very nervous. Think of Socrates, who was condemned to death for corrupting the youth of Athens. What was his crime, really? He was asking questions, encouraging people to think for themselves, to examine their assumptions, to see through the conventional beliefs of society. And for this he had to drink hemlock. The authorities couldn't tolerate someone showing the young people that the emperor had no clothes. Or think of Jesus, who was crucified essentially for the same reason. He was pointing to a reality beyond the religious and political structures of his time. He was saying that the kingdom of heaven is within you, that you don't need priests or temples or elaborate rituals to connect with the divine. This was tremendously threatening to the establishment, both religious and political, because if people realized this, the whole power structure would collapse. The person who sees too much reveals something that most people desperately want to keep hidden, even from themselves. They reveal that you are not who you think you are. That little voice in your head that you call I, that anxious, worried, ambitious entity that's always trying to get somewhere or become something that's not you. That's just a thought pattern, a habit of mind, a character you've been playing for so long that you've forgotten it's a character. What you really are is much vaster, much more mysterious, much more free than this little ego identity. You are the consciousness in which all of this appears. You are not separate from the world, from the universe, from existence itself. You are what the whole cosmos is doing at this particular place and time, just as a wave is what the whole ocean is doing at a particular place and time. But this realization, this seeing, undermines everything that society has taught you about who you are and what you should be doing with your life. It undermines the whole story of progress and achievement and making something of yourself. Because if you're already it, if you're already the universe experiencing itself, then what is there to achieve? Where is there to go? Now, don't misunderstand me. The awakened person doesn't become passive or lazy or irresponsible. Quite the contrary. They often become more engaged with life, more creative, more compassionate. But they're playing the game of life knowingly, consciously, without being trapped by it. They're dancing, but they know they're dancing. And this knowledge, this freedom, is what others find so threatening. Because if you're around someone like this for any length of time, something starts to happen. The certainty you had about your beliefs begins to wobble. The stories you've been telling yourself start to sound a bit hollow. The fears and desires that have been driving you begin to lose their grip. And this is terrifying because these beliefs, these stories, these fears and desires, they're what you've been using to navigate life. They're your map. And if the map is wrong, if it's just a fiction, then you're lost. The person who sees too much doesn't even have to say anything directly challenging. Their very being, their very presence, emanates a kind of freedom that exposes the bondage others are in. It's like someone walking around without chains in a prison where everyone else is shackled. The shackled prisoners don't feel grateful. They feel accused. They feel judged, even though no judgment is being made. This is why awakened individuals often learn to hide their light, so to speak. They learn to speak in parables and paradoxes, to couch their insights in acceptable language, to appear more conventional than they are, because they've learned that most people aren't ready to hear the truth. Most people are too invested in their illusions, too identified with their roles, too afraid of the freedom that comes with seeing through the game. And, there's a kind of violence in waking someone up before they're ready. If someone is having a pleasant dream, you don't shake them awake unless the house is on fire. The person who sees too much understands this. They understand that awakening happens in its own time, that you can't force it, that everyone is exactly where they need to be in their journey. But still, their very existence is a kind of invitation, a possibility, a door standing open. And for those who are ready, who are beginning to question their own dream, who are starting to feel that something isn't quite right with the official version of reality for these people, encountering someone who has seen through the veil can be life-changing. It can be the catalyst for their own awakening. However, for those who aren't ready, who are deeply invested in the dream, who have built their entire identity and sense of security on the collective hallucination for these people, the awakened individual is a threat that must be neutralized. And society has many ways of doing this. The most obvious way is simply to ignore them, to dismiss them as crazy or impractical or naive. Oh, that's all very nice and mystical, people say, but you can't live that way in the real world. You've got bills to pay, responsibilities to meet, a life to live. As if the awakened person isn't living. As if they're somehow less engaged with reality rather than more engaged. But you see, this dismissal reveals the real fear. What if they're right? What if there is another way to live that doesn't involve all this striving and suffering and anxiety? What if you could be in the world fully without being of it, without being trapped by it? This possibility is so threatening that it must be dismissed immediately, without examination. Another way society deals with those who see too much is to try to capture them, to domesticate them, to turn them into another part of the system. Oh, you've had a spiritual experience? Wonderful. Why don't you write a book about it? Give some lectures. Start a retreat center. And before you know it, the person who saw through the game has become a player in a new game, the spiritual seeking game, which can be just as much of a trap as any other game. Or society might try to explain away their insights. Oh, you think you've awakened? That's just a neurological phenomenon, or a psychological state, or the result of meditation practice, as if giving it a label somehow diminishes it, somehow makes it safe and manageable and less threatening. But these labels are just more concepts, more ways of avoiding the direct encounter with what is. The deepest fear that people have about those who see too much is not that they're wrong, but that they're right, that there really is another way of experiencing reality. That the anxiety and suffering and endless striving that characterizes most human life is not necessary, not inevitable, not the price we have to pay for being conscious beings. Because if that's true, then you've been had. You've been living in a prison of your own making. You've been taking seriously what doesn't need to be taken seriously, and ignoring what really matters. You've been, in the words of Thoreau, living a life of quiet desperation when you could have been dancing. And nobody wants to realize this. It's too painful. It's easier to dismiss the awakened ones as deluded, impractical, or dangerous than to consider that they might be seeing something you're missing. It's easier to stay in the comfortable prison of your familiar suffering than to step into the terrifying freedom of not knowing who you are. But here's the beautiful paradox. The awakened person isn't actually threatening you. They're not trying to take anything from you or impose anything on you. In fact, they see you more clearly and compassionately than you see yourself. They see that you're playing a role, yes, but they also see what's behind the role, the same consciousness, the same awareness, the same fundamental being that they've discovered in themselves. They see that you're afraid, and they understand why. They see that you're suffering, and they have compassion. They see that you're lost in the dream, and they remember what that's like because they were lost too once. They're not judging you. They're simply being what they are. And their being serves as a mirror in which you might, if you dare to look, see your own true nature reflected. The fear that people feel toward those who see too much is really the fear of their own freedom. It's the fear of discovering that they've been playing a game all along that they could have stopped any time they wanted. It's the fear of responsibility, not the conventional responsibility of paying bills and meeting obligations, but the deeper responsibility of being the author of your own experience, the creator of your own reality. You see, as long as you believe that reality is fixed and solid and you're just a small, separate individual trying to survive in it, then you're off the hook. You can blame circumstances, other people, your past, your genetics, society, anything. But if you wake up and see that you are not separate from reality, that you are reality experiencing itself, then suddenly you can't blame anyone or anything. You are it. And that's a terrifying realization for most people. The person who sees too much has accepted this responsibility. They've stopped arguing with reality, stopped resisting what is, stopped pretending to be other than what they are. And in that acceptance, in that surrender, they've found a kind of freedom that others can scarcely imagine. Not freedom from circumstances. They still have bodies that get sick, relationships that have difficulties, problems to solve. But freedom from the psychological suffering that comes from resistance, from wanting things to be different than they are, from identifying with a separate self that must constantly defend and promote itself. This freedom is attractive and terrifying in equal measure. It's attractive because everyone wants to be free of suffering. But it's terrifying because it requires dying, not physically, but psychologically. It requires the death of the ego, the death of the story you've been telling yourself about who you are and what life is about. And nobody wants to die, even metaphorically, even when that death would lead to a greater life. So people fear those who see too much because they represent a kind of death, the death of illusion, the death of the familiar, the death of the known. But they also represent a kind of birth, the birth into reality, into presence, into your true nature. And birth, like death, is frightening, even when it's exactly what needs to happen. The tragedy is that this fear causes people to miss the very thing they most deeply long for. Beneath all the striving and achieving and worrying and planning, there's a deep longing for peace, for wholeness, for coming home to yourself. The person who sees too much has found that home, not by going anywhere or becoming anything, but simply by waking up to what they already are. And their message, though it's often unspoken, is simply this: you can wake up too. You don't have to live in fear. You don't have to take the dream so seriously. You don't have to spend your whole life trying to become something other than what you already are. You are it. You've always been it. You could never be anything else. But this message, this truth, is too simple, too immediate, too obvious. People want something more complicated, more difficult, more distant. They want a path to follow, a goal to achieve, something to do. And the awakened person says, there's nowhere to go and nothing to do because you're already there and you're already doing it. And people find this infuriating because it pulls the rug out from under their entire project of self-improvement and spiritual seeking. So they fear those who see too much, because these awakened ones reveal the cosmic joke, the divine comedy, the ultimate irony, that what you're seeking is what's seeking, that the seeker is the sought, that you are what you're looking for.